When I look back, I sometimes wonder how life became so tangled. I wasn't always the orchestrator of complicated plans or the keeper of painful secrets. Growing up, our house was a whirlwind of energy. My dad worked long hours restoring vintage cars while my mom meticulously balanced our household, or so I thought. I've since learned that perfection often hides cracks. I remember a summer when everything seemed simple. Dad and I spent most mornings jogging through the park, a ritual that started as his way of keeping me healthy, but became something more. We'd race to the old oak tree at the park's edge, and he'd let me win just often enough to keep me trying. Mom would watch from the porch with a cup of coffee, waving us off with a smile that seemed so genuine at the time. One fall, when I was about 12, my dad took me on a road trip to a car show in Nevada. It was our first adventure without Mom, and I felt like his co-pilot. We stopped at diners along the way, and he taught me how to read a road map. At night, we stayed in motels with neon signs buzzing faintly outside the windows. That's when he gave me my nickname, Keith, after his favorite mechanic from years ago. "You're sharp, quick on your feet, and you've got grease under your nails," he said with a grin. Not long after, things began to shift. I'd catch my mom staring off into the distance, her hands paused over a task as if her mind was elsewhere. Dad didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did but chose to ignore it. Around this time, I started stepping up more at home, filling in gaps where I saw them, though I couldn't have articulated why. High school brought its own challenges. Balancing academics and social life was never an issue for me. I thrived in both. But my parents' dynamic grew increasingly strained. Arguments over small things, like what to have for dinner, stretched into full-blown confrontations. Dad would retreat to the garage and Mom would pace the kitchen, muttering under her breath. I learned to disappear into my room, headphones on, music blaring. The turning point came during my junior year. I'd just been elected class president and was buzzing with excitement. When I rushed home to tell my parents, I found Mom sitting on the couch, staring at her phone with a look of guilt. She barely registered my news. Dad, however, pulled me into a bear hug, beaming with pride. It struck me then how starkly different their reactions were, and how much that would come to mean. Later that year, I overheard a phone call that changed everything. My mom's hushed tone, the way she said someone's name, it sent chills down my spine. That's when the seed of suspicion took root. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started piecing together the fragments, gathering evidence in the way I imagined a detective might. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew the truth would eventually come to light. As I prepared for my senior year, the facade my family had maintained for so long began to crumble. I decided then that I wouldn't let anyone dictate my future. I'd take control of my own narrative, even if it meant rewriting the roles everyone else played. Little did I know, the hardest choices were yet to come. My name is Melinda Carson, but most people call me Linda. My father, however, prefers to address me as Keith. Let me paint a picture for you of the scene. "Hold it together, Mom," I whispered sharply to the woman sitting beside me. "If you can't stop crying, I'll have the staff escort you out. This is a celebration, so act like it. Look around, everyone is smiling." "This doesn't feel right," she murmured, barely audible. I didn't offer any comfort. "Mom, you set this in motion. Everyone here is enjoying themselves, so take part in the moment," I replied, smiling and waving at a few attendees to keep appearances up. Thankfully, my words didn't travel far. All eyes were fixed on the church aisle ahead. Now back to my story. About a year ago, I came home from school, gearing up for the harvest dance. In California, our mild fall weather makes outdoor events like the Harvest Festival a big deal. I needed the perfect outfit. Not because I had to impress anyone. I've been with Dean, my boyfriend, since sophomore year, but because I'm popular, even without being a cheerleader. Dean, the preacher's kid, is moral to a fault. My mom always told me to walk down the aisle a maid, but to make sure my husband wakes up tired. I plan to take it a step further and have Dean wake up scared. My popularity isn't just looks, it's brains. I've been in the National Honor Society every year, keeping a 4.0 GPA except for a freshman year C in gym. I've never been athletic, but that summer, my dad got me into shape. We started running together, working out and bonding. Little did I know my body transformed. I grew stronger, leaner, and more coordinated, and people noticed. When I returned to school, the fitness assessments painted a stark contrast. Freshman year, I could barely manage 8 push-ups and 2 seconds on a chin hang. This year, I crushed it. 25 push-ups, 50 squats, and 12 pull-ups. Even the gym teacher was stunned, as were my classmates. "Linda, you did push-ups the men's way," my teacher said. Becky, my best friend, was equally baffled. "What the hell did you do this summer?" she demanded. "Just spent time with Dad," I replied, shrugging. Word spread fast. Boys who'd never noticed me before suddenly hovered, and Becky enjoyed the attention. Meanwhile, I focused on my goals, staying close to the smart crowd because I knew what I wanted out of life. I like to think I stayed the same through high school, but by sophomore year, others saw me differently. This moment came into focus last year during my senior year. One day, I got home early because my English teacher was sick. As I walked through the house, I heard moaning from my parents' bedroom. At 18, I understood what it was and didn't think much of it. I knocked on the door and said, "When you're done, I need help." My mom always gave fashion advice, and my dad always gave honest opinions. "Dad, where's the Mustang?" I asked, realizing it was odd that he wasn't driving it. Then it hit me. I'd heard my mom's voice, but not his. Opening the door, I saw my mother scrambling to dress and my high school principal, Mr. Eddington, pulling up his pants. "You're a damn traitor!" I yelled at my mom. "And you, Eddington, my dad will ruin you!" Slamming the door, I ran out and ignored my mom's frantic calls. I stayed at my friend Becky's house until I was sure my dad was home. When I returned, the sight of my dad's Mustang, a car he adored, only made me feel worse. Inside, he greeted me warmly, hugging me as he always did. "Tough day, kitten?" he asked, his concern so genuine it broke my heart. "Yeah, Dad," I replied. "Sometimes you think you can count on people, but they let you down." My mom paled at my words, but my dad didn't notice. I told him we'd talk after dinner. In the kitchen, my mom tried to talk to me. "Don't touch me," I hissed. "You've spent my whole life telling me what I can't do or shouldn't try. Dad believes in me, you never have. When I wanted to run for student council, he said, 'Go for it.' You told me it wasn't likely. When I wanted to run for prom queen, you said only cheerleaders win. Dad gave me a necklace that said I was his queen before the votes were even counted. When I won, he asked if I'd ever doubted myself. You were shocked. You've always poured cold water on my dreams." "Melinda, let me explain," she pleaded. "There's nothing to explain," I said. "You filled my head with doubt my entire life. Now you've betrayed Dad. He deserves better, and I don't want anything to do with you, Dot. When I chose pre-law in college to become a prosecutor and pursue justice, you dismissed it, saying, 'That's not what a girl should do. You've spent my life pouring cold water on my dreams.'" "Watch your tone, young lady," my mom snapped, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Why?" I shot back, the anger boiling over. "Are you still the shining example of what a woman should be? I don't think so. Unless cheating is part of the definition. Dad deserves someone who's loyal, not someone who preaches values they don't follow." Her face paled. "Melinda, I love your father. It was a mistake, just one. Please give me another chance," she pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. I met her gaze, refusing to relent. "Mom, mistakes happen once or in the heat of the moment. You intentionally brought another man into Dad's bed. This wasn't an accident. It's likely happened before. You've destroyed 2 families. Tears welled in her eyes as she begged, "Please don't do this. It will devastate your father and tear us apart." "You're right. Why should Dad suffer?" I said coldly. "Call that man now and quit your job. Find another one if you have to. But if I catch you going back, I'll tell Dad everything. Hand over your phone. I'll check the records. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me." I stood, crossing my arms with finality. "I'll talk to Dad about sleeping arrangements tonight and replacing that bed. You'd better make it happen." "But Melinda, your father will notice if things aren't normal," she tried. "You'll need me for advice during big moments in your life." "I'll find someone trustworthy for that," I said coldly, walking out. I took her purse, retrieved her phone, and made her call Eddington. She quit her job, forbade him from contacting her, and cut ties completely. "Well done, Teresa," I said. "It was painful," she admitted. "What hurts? Saying goodbye to your lover or realizing how awful you've been?" I snapped. "If you loved Dad, this wouldn't have happened." "Melinda, one day you'll understand," she said sadly. "I hope not," I retorted. "I'll never understand how someone could betray a man who loves them completely. Do you even know the rumors about Eddington? You're not the first woman he's targeted, just the most recent. He'll replace you in no time." I left the room and went to the garage where Dad was happily tinkering with his Mustang. 3 neighbors stood nearby, admiring his work. Dad looked up, smiled at me, and asked, "Supper ready?" "Not yet. Take your time," I said. Watching him, I realized how naive he was. So content with life, so hardworking to provide for us. I couldn't bring myself to shatter his happiness. Mom had started working only recently, becoming Eddington's secretary without any prior experience. In that moment, I decided to stay silent, for Dad's sake, not hers. I wasn't sure it was the right choice, but it felt like the best option at the time. The day after my mom quit, I was called into the principal's office. Eddington asked me to close the door, but I refused. He warned me my grades might suffer if I didn't cooperate, hinting teachers could evaluate my work more critically. "You must have a solution, right?" I asked. When he nodded, I slammed the door so hard it echoed through the halls. "Who do you think you are, Darth Vader? You're not scaring me. I've earned my grades through hard work, and if anything changes, I'll confront my teachers directly. Most of them respect me more than they do you." I pulled out my phone and played a recording of his threat. His face paled as I pointed out that his blackmail attempt was both stupid and illegal. Before this, I'd already agreed not to tell Dad or your wife, but now, you should be more afraid of what I'll do next. I'm going back to class. Storming into the hall, I ran into my favorite teacher, Miss Abra. She was a school legend, admired by men and envied by women. Her effortless beauty made girls feel inadequate, even though she didn't flaunt it. Her hair, naturally mouse brown, reacted to sunlight, creating a blend of natural highlights women pay fortunes to replicate. It cascaded down her back like butterfly wings. Her face was equally stunning. Bright blue eyes that could leave anyone in a trance, a delicate nose she tried to hide with makeup, and a smile that lit up the room. She hated the faint freckles on her nose, but they only made her more charming. Her body was just as striking. Petite but curvy, her proportions seemed ideal. Though she had a small chest, just a 34C, her frame made it seem larger. Her tiny waist and toned legs added to her allure, but she dressed modestly in lab coats and long skirts, rarely acknowledging her beauty. She was oblivious to the effect she had on everyone. Standing before her, I realized how unfair life could feel. Some people, like Miss Abra, had everything effortlessly, and some, like Eddington, used power to manipulate others. But in that moment, I knew I'd fight back against people like him, no matter how much it tested me. The most frustrating thing about Miss Abra is her kindness. She spends extra time helping students understand math and science, especially shy or socially awkward kids. However, she's strict with athletes, putting many on academic probation. When a coach angrily confronted her over a player's grades, she didn't back down. Years ago, that same coach tried to date her but was flatly rejected. Frustrated, he spread rumors that she preferred women. My mom once mentioned hearing that Miss Abra had been married. Her husband, a childhood friend, had joined the army but tragically died in a training accident before he could serve. It was a senseless loss that deeply affected her. "Are you okay, Melinda?" Miss Abra asked when she saw me leaving Eddington's office. "Yes, ma'am. Just annoyed," I replied. "Good. I hope you're not in trouble," she said with a warm smile. "No, but I could use some advice. Fashion advice, to be exact," I said. "Oh, I'm the wrong person for that. Maybe Mrs. Delacoy could help. She knows Parisian fashion and watches all the style shows," she suggested, unaware of her own beauty. "Actually, I was asking you," I clarified. "Me? But you're far more beautiful than I am," she exclaimed. Eventually, she agreed to help, but only if I helped recruit students for the upcoming nature hike. Despite her modesty, I knew she could effortlessly fill the sign-up sheet by just showing up without her lab coat and glasses. Later that day, I returned home and found my mom waiting for me in the kitchen. She greeted me with a plate of cookies as if nothing had happened. "Hi, Teresa," I said coldly, refusing to play along. We agreed not to talk. "Melinda, this is ridiculous," she said, her tone firm but strained. "We're family. We should at least try to get along." I fixed her with an icy stare. "Teresa, you've spent my life setting rules you don't follow. I don't respect you anymore, so there's no point in talking." She bristled but pressed on. "Families forgive each other," she insisted, almost pleading. "Then let's tell Dad and see if he forgives you," I shot back. "He's given you everything, and you betrayed him for nothing. What did Eddington ever do for you?" Her voice faltered as she admitted. "Nothing." "Exactly," I said, my tone cutting. "If I tell Dad, you'll lose both him and me. Is that what you want?" She shook her head silently, her composure beginning to crack. "Just stop while you're behind," I warned, my voice low but sharp. Tears welled in her eyes, and she whispered, "I can't believe you're so unforgiving." I didn't flinch. "Be glad you're my mom. If you were anyone else, I'd have ruined your life. Consider this mercy. Stay faithful or you'll regret it." That evening, I joined Dad for a jog. Mom tried to tag along, offering to ride my old bike, but I quickly shut her down, pointing out it had a flat tire. She backed off with a self-deprecating comment about her weight. Dad, ever oblivious, kissed her and reassured her. She turned to me with a smug smile. "See? He still loves me. I love him too, Melinda. I just wanted a little excitement." "It'll be exciting when he divorces your cheating A," I said calmly. She shook her head and retreated to the kitchen, defeated. When Dad and I ran, we talked. He shared work problems and plans for his Mustang while I told him about the post-harvest dance and Mrs. Abra's nature hike. With a little convincing, he agreed to join me. When he suggested bringing Mom, I told him she had other plans. On Saturday morning, we grabbed a quick breakfast before heading out. Mrs. Abra arrived in her Pontiac GTO, which caught Dad's immediate attention. He inspected it thoroughly before finally introducing himself. As more students and parents arrived, including Coach Cleats with his football team, Dad quickly stepped aside. Coach Cleats, as usual, tried to charm her, but she shut him down. "It's Mrs. Abra, Coach," she said firmly. "We're not friends, and I need your players focused on collecting samples, not trampling vegetation." Embarrassed, he backed off as students snickered. The day was productive. Dad and I worked as a team, collecting samples and earning praise from Mrs. Abra, who often followed us to see where we'd found specimens. She and Dad got along well, though they were rarely alone. Mothers kept approaching Dad, and men tried to talk to her. By afternoon, the samples were packed, and everyone prepared to leave. I noticed Eddington showed up briefly, but left quickly when he saw Dad and me. Mom's car also passed by without stopping. Coincidence? Maybe. Before we left, Mrs. Abra stopped us. "Jim," she said, "thank you for helping. Weren't you about to ask me something earlier?" Dad hesitated. "Could I see the engine in your GTO? I know it's a 5.7-liter V8 like the Corvette, but why does it only have 350 horsepower? My Mustang's 5.0 puts out 462. She laughed. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but sure." She opened the hood, still smiling. Unfortunately, Coach Cleats joined us, claiming he could fix a non-existent carburetor problem. Dad calmly corrected him. It was fuel injected, but the coach stomped off after another failed attempt to impress her. We said goodbye and headed home. At home, Mom greeted us nervously, offering to hug Dad while I kept my distance. "Melinda, don't you have a date tonight?" she asked. "Dean and I went out last night," I replied. "Tonight he's helping his dad clean the church. You always said relationships require support, right?" Her face paled at my pointed tone. "Girls who focus on too many guys end up with none," I added, quoting her. She looked like I'd punched her. "I didn't cook dinner," she said, changing the subject. "Maybe your dad and I will order pizza and watch TV." "That sounds great," I said, pulling Dad away. "I'll order the pizza. You pick a movie, but no tragic love stories where someone cheats or dies." While Dad went to the door to get the pizza and chat with the delivery guy about his Mustang, Mom seized the moment to speak to me. "It would be nice if you let me spend the evening alone with your dad," she said. "How can I fix things if you're always around?" "3 things," I replied coldly. "First, get tested for STDs before touching him. Second, I saw you driving near the park at the same time as your lover. If I find out you've spoken to him, all bets are off. Third, I thought we weren't supposed to be talking." Before she could respond, Dad returned with the pizza. "I'll get drinks for all of us," he said cheerfully, heading to the kitchen. Mom smiled and patted my shoulder, but as soon as he was out of earshot, we were at it again. "If you touch me again, you'll be divorced before you can pull your hand away," I snapped. "Melinda, give me a chance to make peace," she pleaded. "I'm not your enemy. You had a contract with Dad to be loyal and faithful," I said. "You broke it. You don't fix something like that. I've already been more lenient than you deserve. If I'd told Dad, you'd be living with Grandma right now." She paled as I outlined her likely future. Living in her mom's basement, broke and jobless, since Eddington had already replaced her. "Dad would probably waive alimony if it meant paying for my college," I added. "That's not fair," she cried. "I made one mistake. Why should I lose everything?" "Cheating isn't a mistake, it's a choice," I said icily. Dad returned with drinks, oblivious to our tension. He handed Mom a glass of wine, me a Pepsi, and sat down with his beer. I sat between them and hugged Mom briefly, shocking her. We started the movie, but my mind raced with thoughts. The next morning, I reflected on the situation. At 18, I was teaching my nearly 40-year-old mother a lesson in morality. Dad had always protected me, but now I needed to protect him. I'd seen friends' families destroyed by affairs, leaving the cheated-on parent broken. I didn't want that for Dad. My earlier attempt to nudge him toward Miss Abra had failed. He was oblivious to her charm, and she was too shy to take initiative. I realized someone bolder might be better for him. Then it hit me. Daniel's mom, Mrs. Kinney, could be perfect. She'd been through a rough divorce, but was still attractive and slim. With a little encouragement, she could regain her confidence and help Dad move on from Mom's betrayal. The idea felt right. Mom thought she had control, but she didn't realize I was just biding my time until I was ready to cut her loose. Did I feel guilty? Not at all. She didn't feel guilty, only sorry she got caught. Now I had a plan. Monday at school was chaos. Eddington avoided me all day. I tried stopping by his office to mention seeing him in the park on Saturday, but he was always absent. Later, I spotted him leaving for lunch with his new secretary. That told me everything I needed to know. During lunch, I ran into Miss Abra. "Hi, Melinda," she said lightly. "What can I help you with?" "I was hoping you could help me pick an outfit for the Harvest Festival dance," I replied. "Of course," she said, smiling, though her expression suggested she knew this wasn't just about clothes. "You're stunning, Miss Abra," I began. "You're probably the most—" She interrupted with a quiet comment that stopped me cold. "It's a shame your father doesn't think so." Her words consumed my thoughts for the rest of the day. After school, I went to her lab. The other students eventually left, leaving us alone. "Sorry, I got lost in thought," I said as she smiled gently. "You do that a lot. That's why you're such a good student," she replied. We left school together, and I admired her Pontiac GTO as she pulled out of the lot. "It's powerful but smooth," I said, comparing it to Dad's Mustang. We talked cars as she drove to my house. Once inside, she looked over the outfits I'd chosen for the dance and gave her thoughtful opinion. As we talked, Mom appeared in the doorway, uninvited. "Hello, Melinda. I didn't know you were home or had a guest," she said, clearly nervous. "Hello, Teresa," Miss Abra replied politely. "Call me Elena. I hadn't seen you recently. Are you on vacation?" "No, I quit," Mom said, avoiding eye contact. "You resigned? That must have been sudden," Miss Abra said, her tone sharp. "Russell isn't easy to work with. He makes my skin crawl like Coach Cleats. I can't imagine anyone willingly getting involved with him. I don't envy his wife." Mom turned pale, muttered something about having fun, and left. After trying on outfits, we decided the blue dress suited me best. Then we headed to Wendy's for dinner. As we ate, she asked, "If your mom's home, why didn't you ask her to help with your outfit?" "We'll get to that," I said, steering the conversation. Let's talk about something more important. She leaned back, smiling. You're going to be a great prosecutor, Melinda. You cut straight to the heart of things. Thank you, ma'am, I said carefully. I don't mean to offend, but this matters to me. Go on, she said, still smiling. You like my dad, don't you? I asked bluntly. Her reaction was immediate. She choked on her fries, coughing as she quickly sipped her soda. Once composed, her wide eyes met mine. Of course not, she said shakily. I'm not a homewrecker, Melinda. Your dad is a married man. I stayed silent, just watching her fidget nervously. No one will know what we discussed, I assured her. She sighed deeply, resigning to the conversation. Melinda, I'm 33. I've only loved once, and it ended tragically. I've been on the sidelines since. She paused before continuing. I even visited my late husband's family, thinking something familiar might work. But his brothers were disasters. An abusive drunk, a pill dependent, and one in prison. It made me wonder if my husband would have turned out the same. Her voice softened. I know I'm attractive, but I've always struggled to prove I'm more than my looks. My husband was the only one who saw past them. He surprised me every day. And since meeting your father, I've felt something I haven't in years. She hesitated before admitting. Your dad is a contradiction. Handsome yet humble, confident yet kind. Watching him with you Saturday, I could see the joy he finds in life. But I'm not the type to pursue a married man. Besides, he's more interested in my car than me. Her voice grew quieter. The whole time we talked, I wanted him to touch me, but I didn't dare. I leaned in. I'll help you. She choked on her food again. Melinda, he's married. And your mother... She's cheating on him, I snapped. I caught her with Eddington in my dad's bed. She doesn't deserve him. I can't let her keep hurting him. They're getting divorced, and he'll need someone to help him move on. That someone is you. By the time I got home, I felt triumphant. I was sure my plan would work, until Mom confronted me. What are you playing at, Melinda? She demanded. I saw you in the park Saturday. You introduced your father to math and science Barbie and even brought her into my house. If you need help picking clothes, that's my job. I'm your mother. And did you know she prefers girls? She added smugly. I burst out laughing. She doesn't. She's just picky about men. What do you mean? She asked, curious. Remember when we talked about reconciling with Dad? I asked. She nodded. The only way to balance things is if Dad sleeps with someone too. Her eyes widened. If your father sleeps with her, everything will be fine? And you'll forgive me? That was the idea, I said, shrugging. But it won't work. Dad didn't even notice her. He's more interested in her car. Mom smirked. I'll help you, she said suddenly. No one knows your father like I do. We just need to put them in situations where they're forced to connect. Then, when the time is right, we'll lower the boom. She even held out her hand for a high five. I slapped it reluctantly, thinking, God, she's clueless. At school, I told Helena, now my co-conspirator, about the latest developments. I shared my mom's idea to host a practice dance for the Harvest Festival, teaching students partner dances. Helena agreed to chaperone, and I planned to get Dad there too, ensuring they'd end up dancing together. Ironically, the idea came from my mom. As the dance approached, Mom grew anxious but stayed involved, offering advice. On the night of the event, she surprised us by announcing she wouldn't attend. Furious, I confronted her. Why aren't you coming? I demanded. Think, Melinda, she said calmly. Your dad won't dance with Helena if I'm there. It would feel like a betrayal. You'll need to convince him she's upset and lonely, or he'll never approach her. I hated to admit it, but she was right. Once again, Mom outmaneuvered me. When Dean picked me up, my mind was elsewhere, running through everything that could go wrong. At the school parking lot, 2 roaring engines announced Helena and Dad's arrivals. Their cars parked beside Dean's Toyota, a coincidence I took as a sign my plan was blessed. Coach Klitz made an awkward attempt to open Helena's car door, but she firmly rejected him, citing his inappropriate behavior. Dad stepped in, diffusing the tension and escorting Helena inside. She looked stunning in a white sheath dress, a string of pearls, and a flower in her hair, mirroring mine. Heads turned as she entered on Dad's arm. her presence radiating grace and elegance. Inside, Helena stopped Dad as he tried to leave after settling her in. "You saved me. Now you're stuck with me," she said playfully, taking his hand and guiding him to a table. They talked and laughed, looking like they truly belonged together. Just as I thought everything was falling into place, Dad's phone rang. It was Mom. He smiled and reassured her he'd help Helena dance, just as she'd suggested. I seethed, thinking, she's going to ruin this. As the music began, Dean and I danced, but my focus stayed on Dad and Helena. A man approached Helena to dance, but she declined, saying she'd already promised someone else, though he hadn't asked her yet. When an Irish ballad started, Helena stood. "Come on, Jim, they're playing our song." "We have a song?" Dad asked, puzzled. Helena led Dad to the dance floor, smiling as the song began. They started with formal steps, but she gradually pulled him closer. At first he looked unsure, but soon a smile spread across his face. Watching them, I felt reassured. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Helena beamed as they returned to their table, ignoring the men trying to catch her eye. She caught my gaze and mouthed, "Breathless." For Dad, it was an effortless first date, even if he didn't realize it. Then the night unraveled. Coach Klitz, drunk and angry, staggered toward their table, demanding a dance with Helena. "You're wrong, Coach," she said calmly. "I've been monopolizing him, not the other way around." Furious, the coach snarled at Dad. "Just because your wife's cheating with Eddington doesn't mean you can take my woman." Dad's punch came out of nowhere, sending the coach sprawling. Shock and anger flashed across his face as the crowd froze. Before I could react, 3 police officers entered. "Are you James Carson?" one asked. "Yes," Dad replied, holding out his hands for cuffs. The officer shook his head. "We don't care about the fight. We're here because your wife was in a car accident. She wasn't driving, and the man with her is in critical condition." Helena immediately stepped in. "We'll follow you, Jim," she said, taking charge. She drove Dad's Mustang while Dean and I followed in her car. I couldn't stop wondering why Mom was out driving when she was supposed to be home. At the hospital, we were directed to a waiting room near the operating rooms. My analytical mind kept spiraling. Would this accident bring my parents closer? Would they reconcile at her bedside? Worse, would she tell him I knew about her affair all along? My plans for Dad seemed on the verge of collapse. Helena surprised me. She wasn't just a concerned observer. She was visibly upset. I hugged her, assuring her everything would be fine, even as doubt gnawed at me. A doctor eventually emerged with Dad, who looked furious but composed. Helena was immediately at his side, holding his arm as he spoke with the doctor. I caught snippets. Head hit the console, reconstructive surgery if she survives, and jaw closed and took a bite. The implications hit me all at once, and I rushed out, finding an empty bathroom. There, I burst into uncontrollable laughter. It was 5 minutes before I could compose myself, wipe away the tears, and return to reality. When I returned to the waiting room, I caught the end of a conversation. "I'm telling you, you'll regret this if you don't handle it right," Dad said. Helena held his hand and urged him to sit. "I don't care," he replied. "She's on my health plan, but I don't want to talk to her. I just want her out of my life." "Jim, even if you cut her off, it won't be that simple," Elena said gently. "You share a daughter, and there will be times you'll have to be in the same place. Are you telling me you wouldn't attend Melinda's wedding because her mother is there?" Dad crossed his arms but didn't argue as Elena continued. "You need closure, not for her, but for yourself. Without it, you'll carry unanswered questions for years." Her words seemed to calm him, and I marveled at how naturally she seemed to take charge. She encouraged Dad to leave for a drive to clear his head. "Melinda and I will handle things here," she assured him. Dad hugged me before leaving, brushing past a woman who stopped him briefly. "I'm so sorry for your pain," she said. He nodded distractedly, and I realized it was Russell Eddington's wife. As soon as Dad left, Elena turned to me. "Melinda, your mother played us all. She wasn't at the dance because she wasn't sick. She used the chance to sneak off with Russell." "What?" I asked, stunned. "She called your dad to ensure you both stayed at the dance. She and Russell planned to meet at a motel. They crashed into a tree on the way, and while Russell's injuries aren't life-threatening, they're serious. I clenched my fists. That woman was going to cheat on Dad again. He's right. He doesn't need her in his life. Russell's wife spoke up from across the room. Your mother isn't the first, but she might be the last. I turned to her, frustrated. Why would he cheat on someone as beautiful as you? You have 2 adorable kids. Why her? She sighed. Russell's a provider, but not much else. My plan was to stay until my girls were older, then divorce him. Now, with this accident, everything's up in the air. If your father names him in the divorce, my husband will probably lose his job, and I'll need to act fast to secure what's left. She looked at me sadly. I'm so sorry this has hurt your family, young lady. As the thought struck me, my dad returned. Dean hugged me goodbye before leaving, and Dad sat beside me. I switched seats to push him closer to Helena, who immediately took his hand. We chatted about everything except the accident. I eventually dozed off with my head on Dad's shoulder. When a nurse tapped me awake, I noticed Helena was asleep on his other shoulder, holding his arm tightly, a sight I didn't recall ever seeing with my mom. Your mom is awake, the nurse said. She can have brief visitors before the painkillers knock her out again. I woke Dad and Helena, and we took the elevator to her room. The nurse allowed only one visitor at a time, so Dad started toward the door. Helena grabbed his hand. Jim, don't go in angry, she said softly. Just say hello. Can you do that for me? After a moment, he nodded and went in, only to return 15 seconds later. Then it was my turn. Mom was heavily bandaged, with a halo brace keeping her jaw immobilized. Hi, Mom, I said. How are you feeling? A strained grunt escaped her mouth. I told you cheating again would have consequences, but you didn't listen. Now look where you are, I said coldly. Since we're alone, I'll share something. I've been planning this since the day I caught you. I needed someone to take care of Dad when I go to college, and Helena is perfect for him. Thanks for helping me bring them together. Her eyes widened, clearly trying to respond, but even slight movements seemed to hurt. You should be grateful to her. Without Helena, Dad wouldn't have come to see you at all, I added. Mom glared angrily. Don't blame me, Mom. It wasn't my fault Dad found out about you in Eddington. The coach told him, drunk and angry, and Dad punched him in front of the entire school. But it makes me wonder, how did the coach know about you in Eddington? You were a coach too, weren't you? Her inability to meet my eyes said enough. I shook my head. Well, my 5 minutes are up. Goodbye, Mom. I doubt I'll visit often. Outside, Dad took Helena's hand. Thank you, Helena. I couldn't have faced this without you. I've been thinking about what you said, and it makes sense. But even now, I want to strangle her in Eddington. He sighed deeply, then turned to me. Let's go home, Keith. Helena asked for her car keys, and Dad agreed she'd drive home with him. I headed straight to bed when we got back, but even as I drifted off, I could hear them talking downstairs. When I woke up, I showered and went downstairs for breakfast. Dad was asleep on the sofa, snoring softly. In the kitchen, Helena stood at the stove, frying bacon in one pan and flipping pancakes in another. She was wearing Dad's U of M t-shirt, and though I assumed she had underwear on, I wouldn't have bet on it. I borrowed a few things, she said, glancing at me over her shoulder. Your mom's clothes don't fit. Why not jeans or a skirt? I asked, frowning. She raised an eyebrow, and the meaning was clear. She wanted Dad to see her in something he loved. We talked all night, she continued, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. He's really upset, Melinda. We'll have to help him through this. I also told him everything about me. I think I upset him. Why? I asked, crossing my arms. She hesitated, then admitted. I had to be honest. I told him I was at the dance for a reason, and that I'd been drawn to him since we first met in the forest. He might think I'm like your mother, chasing a married man. The only way to explain myself would have been to reveal that I knew he was available, and that would mean exposing you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Her honesty convinced me she wasn't just part of Dad's life. She was part of ours. Don't worry, I said. We'll figure this out after breakfast. She nodded and handed me the fork to finish the bacon. After breakfast, she borrowed a pair of my blue sweatpants to match Dad's sweatshirt. which she refused to take off. She packed a picnic lunch, and despite Dad's protests, she got us out of the house for a picnic. We ended up in the same forest where we'd gathered specimens. We talked the whole time, and I confessed everything. Helena also admitted she loved my dad. He was still hurt and angry, mostly over Mom's betrayal, and though he complimented Helena's beauty several times, he kept saying, "I'd be crazy about you if it weren't for..." We all knew what he meant. Helena asked about Dean, and I reminded her he was at church until noon. On the way home, the hospital called. Mom wanted to see Dad. He gave them his grandmother's phone number instead, and we continued home. We stopped by Helena's apartment so she could grab clothes. When Dad asked how long she'd be staying, she raised an eyebrow again. The rest of the day was quiet. We watched movies, talked, laughed, and ate. Dean joined us after church. Helena stayed close to Dad the entire time, never more than a few inches away. The next day at school, I noticed everyone looking at me. The guys on the team kept joking, calling me Pooh and pretending to throw punches. By lunch, I learned why. Nobody knew exactly what Coach Klitz had said to Dad at the dance, but they all saw Dad knock him out. It wasn't until this morning they discovered the coach had broken his tailbone in the fall. The assistant coach led practice. Later, the deputy principal called a meeting, announcing that Principal Eddington was hospitalized after an accident but wanted things to continue as usual. We were asked to pray for him, though I didn't bother. When someone asked how long he'd be gone, I laughed at the vagueness of the response. At home, I decided to cook dinner. Dad wasn't due back for another 90 minutes, so I was surprised when Helena showed up. She stepped into the kitchen and saw me preparing burgers. "What are we making for sides?" she asked. "How about a big salad?" she suggested. We chopped vegetables together, laughing as we worked. When Dad came home, Helena, dressed in workout clothes, joined him on his run. I knew he noticed how amazing she looked. After their run and showers, we had dinner together, avoiding any mention of Mom. Helena mentioned her car acting up, so after dinner, Dad took it to the garage. She stayed by his side, reading papers while he worked. Later, Grandma called and visited. When she asked why Dad hadn't gone to the hospital, she assumed he was keeping me from seeing Mom. She didn't know the truth. When Dad explained everything about Mom's accident and affair, Grandma was stunned and apologized. She left looking shaken. A week later, we went to the Harvest Festival dance. Dean was my date, and Dad went with Helena. She looked even more stunning than at the practice dance, but this time everyone saw them as a couple. No one dared approach her, probably because she stayed close to Dad all night, and his punch from the dance was still fresh in everyone's mind. The evening was magical. Helena's charm and humor shone through without the constant attention from unwanted admirers. Around Dad, her smile and the sparkle in her eyes tripled. They were perfect together. Afterward, life changed. Helena stopped hiding behind lab coats and safety glasses, and more guys noticed her beauty, though they didn't stand a chance. Every night she waited for Dad at home or sometimes visited him at the factory, eager to spend time together. Their bond grew stronger, and it was clear they belonged together. In the weeks that followed, Dad and Helena offered to take me to the hospital to visit Mom, or let me go alone using Mom's car or the Jeep. But I refused. I didn't want to see her. Helena and Dad were inseparable outside of work, though their relationship remained innocent. I hadn't seen them kiss, and Dad's feelings were unclear. Until one evening when Helena wasn't home. He searched the house and repeatedly looked out the window, but didn't ask about her. I secretly recorded him, wandering anxiously. When Helena returned, Dad acted nonchalant, heading to the garage. She asked me what she'd done. I explained, "He missed you." Helena sighed. "It's time he moved on." She went to the garage, where Dad was working on his car, and kissed him. At first he froze, but then he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back. Watching them, I knew Dad had finally taken a step toward healing. At school, Principal Eddington returned with his wife as his secretary, and Coach Klitz limped back a week later. Both seemed cautious, especially around me and Helena. Klitz even apologized to Helena in a letter. Eddington and his wife occasionally asked about Dad and Mom, clearly nervous about what Dad might do next. Even my grandmother urged us to visit Mom, but everything felt like it hinged on Dad's decision. Helena practically lived with us, though they didn't share a bed. Most nights I'd find them asleep on the couch, fully clothed but clinging to each other. Then the waiting ended. One evening the phone rang. It was Mom, asking for Dad. When I handed him the phone, he straightened, his demeanor shifting. After a few tense words, he hung up and turned to Helena, who held his hand. "I guess it's time," he said, smiling nervously. "Let the battle begin." The following day, he went to visit her. From what he later told me, and from what I gathered from my grandmother, when he walked into the room, she was sitting upright in her hospital bed. She looked thinner and had applied makeup, likely to cover up some bruising. Her usual combative attitude was present, but it no longer had the same effect. "James," she began, "it's upsetting that you haven't come to see me until now. How are we supposed to repair our marriage if we don't talk? I know I made a terrible mistake, and it's going to take a long time to work through this. Honestly, I'm not sure we can do it alone. There's a therapist here at the hospital who specializes in family counseling. Maybe next time you visit, you could bring Melinda and we could try a session together." My father stayed silent. Without a word, he placed a stack of papers on the bed beside her. She glanced at the documents and immediately started crying. "No," she protested. "We're not doing this. We need to talk things out." "All right, Teresa," he said calmly. "Let's talk. Tell me why you did this to us. Explain how our daughter walked in and found you with that man in our bed, in our home. Tell me how an 18-year-old girl had to help her father pick up the pieces of his shattered heart, only for me to discover the truth anyway. Tell me how that stupid coach found out about your behavior with Eddington, and how, even after Melinda confronted you, you promised to stop but went right back to him. Come on, Teresa, talk." "Jim, I'm sorry," she pleaded. "We can work through this. I swear it'll never happen again." "You said the same thing to Melinda," he responded coldly. "There's nothing left to discuss. Get yourself a lawyer, Teresa." The next day, my mother was served divorce papers in her hospital room. According to my grandmother, who was present, a young woman who looked like a college student walked in, chewing gum and holding a folder. "Teresa Carson?" she asked. My mother, clearly expecting this, simply extended her hand. And so began the fight. Over the following weeks, they clashed bitterly. Accusations flew back and forth. My mother refused to agree to the divorce and even leveled counterclaims, including one about my father supposedly moving his mistress into the house. A claim that was technically accurate. Helena, my father's partner, felt awful about the situation. After hearing the accusation, she returned to her apartment, where she hadn't stayed for months. However, my father went to bring her back, insisting her place was with us. The conflict dragged on for weeks. I eventually reached my limit and asked my dad when his next meeting with Mom and her lawyers was. He told me it was the following day. That evening, I went to visit my mother. I laid it out for her plainly. She had lost Dad. There was no chance he would ever take her back. Her best option was to keep things civil. The back and forth escalated so much that Dad eventually withdrew his original settlement offer. Now he refused to give her anything. He wanted full custody of me, ownership of the house, and for her to stop interfering in his life. He also planned to sue Eddington for as much as he could. I decided to step in. I called a meeting with Mr. Eddington and his wife. At a long table, I sat with Dad and Helena at one end, Mom and her lawyers on another, and the Eddingtons on the side. I presented my plan. Under my proposal, Mr. Eddington would pay child support for my mom for 4 years and rehire her as his secretary. This would give her time to return to school and gain skills to support herself once the child support ended. Dad would keep the house, Mom would keep her car, and she could rent Helena's apartment. In return, Dad agreed not to sue or involve Mr. Eddington in the divorce case, and Mom would drop her baseless claims of sexual attack. "I can live with that," Eddington said. His wife, visibly relieved, smiled at me and remarked that I had the makings of a great lawyer. For the Eddingtons, the deal was far cheaper than any legal battles they might face. Still, neither of my parents seemed satisfied. "It doesn't sit right," Dad said. "They wrecked my life and family without any real consequences. Teresa gets off easy and he gets to walk away with his career intact." "I won't accept this," Mom declared. "I won't abandon my family. Yes, I made mistakes, but I was coerced. Eddington was my boss and had power over me. I had no choice. Refusing him could have cost me my job. It's too late for me to start over. I just want my family back." "Enough, Mom," I cut in sharply. "You need to take this deal and let us all move forward. Maybe Eddington was your boss, but don't forget that I caught you. If I testify to what I saw and heard, your claims of coercion will fall apart. And don't forget that at the time of the accident, you weren't even working for him anymore, so coercion doesn't apply. Here's what else you need to think about," I added. "One word from me, and Dad can drop you from his health insurance. Without that, you'll never afford the surgery to fix your face. You'll have to live the rest of your life looking like a Picasso painting. And lastly, you didn't just lose your family. You threw it away. We weren't as important to you as what you had with Eddington. If you push this too far, there might not even be a chance to rebuild a friendship with us in the future. Make the right choice, Mom. Ease Dad's pain. Let him go." I turned to my dad. "You're absolutely right, Dad. You've been the one most hurt in all of this, and I get it. But I want to say two things. First, even though you're justified in how you feel, try to see the bigger picture. Mom and Mr. Eddington are already paying for what they've done. Maybe it doesn't seem like enough, but they're suffering. For Mr. Eddington, it's been especially harsh. He lost something deeply personal. Let's just say an important part of his anatomy. The surgery to reattach it didn't work, and now they're trying to reconstruct one for him. That's just one way he's paying the price. On top of that, he's going to be paying Mom child support, so you don't have to. Isn't that enough to make him suffer? Or do you think his family should pay too? His kids didn't do anything to you, Dad. They're innocent in this mess, and they deserve a stable life. Ruining his career would hurt them more than it hurts him. Besides, his life is already miserable. His wife despises him and will make every day a nightmare. And on top of that, he has to work with Mom while she blames him for everything that's happened. Mom's paying her dues too, I continued. She's losing the man she claims to love, her daughter, her home, and most of her friends. Even the job Eddington offered her isn't permanent. She'll have to start over and rebuild her life from scratch. It's not easy for older women to do that. My mom started crying quietly. And if you think about it, Dad, this works out better for you in the end. You're freeing yourself from a woman you can't trust, a woman who's betrayed you more than once. You get to move on, leave all of this behind, and start fresh. And as a bonus, you've got the sweetest, most incredible, and beautiful woman I've ever known to share your life with. Dad smiled, then hugged Helena. Why are you hugging her? I was talking about me, I joked. Very funny, Keith, Helena said with a grin. My dad nodded in agreement. All right, I'll do it, he said. I looked at my mom. She gave a small nod, then lowered her head and began crying again. The lawyers got to work finalizing the agreement. It was an unusual arrangement for one of the people involved in an affair to pay alimony to the other, but everyone was confident they could get the judge to approve it. If not, Mr. Eddington would send the child support to Dad, who'd pass it along to Mom. 3 days later, they gathered again to sign the paperwork. Mom brought Grandma along for support. Dad came with Helena and me. Mr. Eddington arrived alone. After the signatures were done, Mom, with tears in her eyes, reached out to Dad and asked for one last kiss. Helena quickly intervened with a firm no. About a week later, Helena came to me with a favor. She handed me some cash and her car keys and asked me to take Becky and Dean to the movies. It took me a moment to realize what was going on, but then it clicked. She wanted some alone time with Dad. I couldn't help but laugh. You don't have to bribe me, I said. Is this a special occasion? Have you two already started, experimenting? What's your usual routine? We haven't started anything yet, she admitted. Oh my God, I groaned. I'm leaving. I didn't need to know you hadn't already. Judging by their glowing smiles the next morning, I'd say things went very well. A few months later, we found ourselves in a church for their wedding. I stood proudly as both a bridesmaid and a groomsman. Why not? Since I was the one who introduced them and helped bring them together. The only downside was that Mom wouldn't stop talking. I had no idea why she was even there. Maybe they wanted to rub her nose in it, or maybe she just showed up uninvited. We had to do the wedding that week because I was heading off to college soon, and Helena was running out of time to fit into her dress. The doctor suspected she might be pregnant with twins. During the ceremony, the priest reached the familiar question at the end of the vows. Does anyone here know of any reason why this man and woman should not be joined in marriage? I noticed Mom about to speak and immediately leaned over, whispering in her ear, Mom, if you say one word, I'll slap you right here in this church. And so this is the part where I say, and they all lived happily ever after.